Politico. Let's bring in our gaggle, AEI visiting fellow Ramesh Ponnuru, who writes for the National Review and Bloomberg View, Washington Bureau Chief of USA Today Susan Page, and the Democratic strategist Steve McMahon. Welcome all. Happy Monday. Ramesh, I'm going to start with you. This new project, we know that a lot of established Republicans have said, hey, you got to fight back in these primaries, you got to get involved. But this strikes me as something that is going to make things more divisive inside the Republican Party before it gets better. But is that what the party needs?
If you look at the reaction to this New York Times story, you get the distinct impression that there are a lot of Republicans who dislike each other more than they dislike the Democrats.
Yeah, they seem to be more intent on having this fight.
I think that's a problem. But the other question I have is, how would this, even looking backwards, how would this have made a difference in those races? I mean, if Todd Aiken is the example, remember, that was a three-way race. It was a very tight three-way race. How would this group have picked one of the other two
what Stephen Law will say
and put him over to the top?
5 seats.
Yeah.
That anybody other than Sharon Angle would have beaten Harry Reid. I question that now when you look at where Nevada's going, but let's give him that. Obviously, that anybody, John Brunner would be senator today. Mike Castle would be in Delaware. Dick Lugar would be in the United States Senate today. So there's about a set of seats right there. And
why do people think that the expenditure of a bunch of money is going to cause conservative voters in Indiana to decide to back an incumbent when they didn't want to?
And Susan, I think that's actually the other question. David Dewhurst had much more money than Ted Cruz.
Right.
And he lost. And by the way, the least funded candidate, as he points out in that Missouri Senate primary, Todd Aiken.
So maybe what they need are open primaries in all these states. Because as long as you have Republican primaries, you're going to have...
But that's what they should be working on,
right.
Opening up the independent.
If your point is to get the most electable person from your party, you don't do it with the primary system we have. But by the way, what is the role of the Republican Party in a system where you've got the Tea Party forces being powerful, you've got the moneyed forces with Karl Rove and this group being powerful, and where exactly does the traditional Republican infrastructure fit in figuring out where the GOP ought to go?
Steve McMahon, when you had less gray hair, the Democratic Party, you were involved in a Democratic Party that used to do this to each other.
Yes.
I'm seeing these fights and these little spats, and I'm reminded of the chairman of the DNC in 1989, a guy by the name of Ron Brown, mocking the head of the DLC, a guy by the name of Bill Clinton.
That's right. That's right.
Having similar fights.
Well, and you know, and the other thing that happened in the Howard Dean campaign and later was the progressive part of the party said we're not going to be ignored anymore, and they stood up and they started primarying people like Joe Lieberman. But one of the things that the Democrats learned is that you don't solve, if you think that's a problem, and I don't think it's a problem, but if you do think it's a problem, you don't solve it by attacking your base. And you don't announce, if you're a Republican conservative group, in the New York Times.
Well, I have to say, I wasn't going to say that, but that was pretty, I mean, you know, look, I
would have been there.
But they clearly are looking for donors, right? I mean, that's what it is.
Right.
It was
publicity.
And publicity.
And so are the groups on the other side, right, who are obviously raising money off the idea, look, we're going to fight back against these establishment sellouts.
I guess my question, Susan, though, is this something that the party actually has to go through? Like, part of me wonders, it's sort of part of your therapy session. You have to have this giant fight. It may be ugly. It may make 2014 worse, not better.
Right.
But it may actually prepare them for, just like 1989, 1980, horrible for the Democrats in these little internal fights. It got them Bill Clinton in 92.
And 2 defeats and a kind of a crushing, you know, you knew they were going to lose in 2008. The Republicans had a winnable race in 2012, which they, for the presidency, which they didn't deliver on. So, yeah, I think they need to figure out where the party's going to go, who does it stand for, how do they reach out to some of the voters that they're going to have to get if they're going to win national elections. And it's not kind of, it's like you have to hit bottom first. You sort of feel like Republicans are not yet as splintered as they're going to be before they start to come back.
Unless they move the first battleground out of Iowa, they're going to have a real problem getting to the middle, because Iowa produces, the Christian conservative almost always wins the caucus in Iowa, and then they come into New Hampshire with some momentum. A lot of times
because of what Chief said, open primary. You have independents involved, so you have a different aspect of the party having a fight, and then of course back to conservative South Carolina.
Well, yeah, and you need to open up the primaries, and the caucuses. But a caucus is basically, as you know, it's all about organization. So you can say everybody come in, but the only people who are going to come in are the people who are invited in and walked in and given a ride and taken to the polls. And that's going to be on the conservative side a process that favors the most conservative candidate.
Going back to my question to Susan, is it better for the party to have this fight public like this now, even if it makes things worse short term?
Well, it's probably better to have it now as opposed to a year from now. now.
Yeah.
The further away you are from an election, the better. But I think that the problem right now is the factions of the Republican Party want to blame one another for the defeat, when in fact all of them lost races last year, and they need to look at themselves and not just
right. Rick Berg wasn't a Tea Party guy.
Exactly.
You know,
George Allen.
Denny Rehberg, not a Tea Party guy. George Allen, not a Tea Party guy. All right. Stick around. Trivia time. We asked Democratic Senator Bill Nelson, lost only one election in his political career. Steve McMahon knew this answer because he worked for him in that election. The answer was Walkin' Lawton Childs. He defeated Nelson in the 1990 Democratic primary for governor. Nelson was a sitting member of Congress. Lawton went on to win that race for Florida governor. Beat another guy named Jeb Bush in 1994. Served almost 2 terms. If you got a trivia question for us, email us at dailyrundown@msnbc.com. We'll be right back.